Thanks everyone for attending. And like Roshni said, there isn't really an agenda here. Mostly we're just going to be taking folks' questions and trying to work through them. So I think the way to do this is for everyone to mute their microphones unless they're asking a question. And just so everyone doesn't jump in all at once, maybe we'll take one at a time, and then when we wrap up the question, we'll prompt for the next question. If folks don't have microphones, or if for whatever reason it just doesn't seem to work, you can also type in questions using the webinar software. So who would like to go first? Okay, looks like Leo's got the excuse me, the first question here. Go ahead.
Frank, do you want to go ahead and just read the question? It might have a tough time with the microphone.
Yeah, unfortunately I don't have a question yet. Just a question about email tokens, but the actual question isn't there. I did hear another voice on the line. Is that you, Leo?
Oh, this was David. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay. Great. Well, let's since we have your voice and Leo hasn't finished formulating his question, why don't you go ahead with yours, David?
Okay. By the way, thank you all for doing this. We use CiviVolunteer. We have a 100+ member choir that we record all of their attendance and everything as volunteer time. So this is very beneficial to us. One thing, our membership person who enters all this information, one thing she's asked me if I could look into was to see, for example, we have to add each of these 100 people individually every week, and she's wondering if there's some way we can group add them or drag them all at the same time kind of thing, add them to an event, because we, for example, an event will be a rehearsal, and then we add all of these 100 people to that event. And so that's what she's wondering.
Unfortunately, there isn't a great way to do that right now. Okay. I can show you what we've been working on. Like I might need to. Oh, it looks like I left this in the middle of coding here, so let me go ahead and clean that up. Sorry about that. We are working on some functionality in the next version of CiviVolunteer 1.4, which is the already funded work. Some of you might have seen some blog posts about the next round of CiviVolunteer development for CiviVolunteer 2.0. And so that is a different story. This is for 1.4, which should be released pretty shortly. And let me see if I can preview that for you here. boy. Okay, let's try. Okay, unfortunately, it looks like I left this in kind of an inconsistent state, so I'm not going to be able to preview the
that's
1.4 functionality. But basically, what we're trying to do is on the screen. Okay, let's try a different test site here. Let's just create some. Right, so what we're trying to have is on this screen here is some icons in 1.4 which appear in this corner where my mouse is, and you'll be able to click like a little search icon, which will pull up basically a custom search if you've seen one of those in CiviCRM. You know, for instance, the zip code search, and so actually, let's try it. Just any old search here. And so you could then, select everyone who matches. So maybe your search is, everyone who's in a group. If you have your volunteers stored in a group, you could select them all, and there will be a new action in this list that will let you add them to the role that you started the process from. So back on the Manage Volunteer screen here. Does that make sense? So you'll hit an icon here. It will pull up in a modal, just like this, a search form. You can conduct your search, and with those results, send them into a particular assignment. Okay, it looks like Leo's audio isn't coming in, so I'm going to read his question out loud here. When I try to compose emails, I don't see much for tokens. What exists for being able, for example, to embed the need into a volunteer reminder? So I think the question refers to for instance, if you're trying to schedule a reminder for volunteers, you could do, let's say, volunteer tomorrow, and if you haven't used the scheduled reminder functionality in CiviCRM, definitely check it out because it's very flexible. So we could do, the entity you'll want to do here is activity, and the type of activity will be volunteer. And so what Leo is asking about is, are there any tokens here where you can provide information about the person's volunteer schedule or the shift they signed up for or the need? And there unfortunately aren't at this point. I'm surprised this is the first request I've heard for this kind of functionality because it would be very useful. But maybe the workaround for this, for the time being, is to keep your language fairly generic and hopefully providing details about the event at large will give enough information that, or perhaps you can have people email, suggest to people that if they need more information, this is your volunteer manager for the day, that sort of thing. But no, there aren't any tokens yet for CiviVolunteer. Leo adds, that's a glaring omission since we want to send reminders. I don't disagree with you. That would be a great feature to have. Unfortunately, it's not one that anyone has stepped forward to fund. So it hasn't been built yet. If anyone would like to ask a question, please go ahead and unmute your mic or type it into the Q&A. Looks like we just had someone new join. So I will just kind of reiterate how we're conducting this webinar. So it's not really a webinar, it's more of a Q&A session. There's no agenda. So we're asking folks to keep their microphones muted, but when in between questions, I'll prompt for new questions. You can type them into the Q&A. If you don't have a microphone, or just go ahead and unmute and ask your question. And it looks like we got a new one in through the chat here. So Leo's got a couple more questions. What about the ability to copy volunteer needs when copying an event? It's a pain to add the volunteer needs manually. Right, that is also not currently an implemented feature. CiviVolunteer doesn't really live in CiviEvent as far as all of the programmatic workflows are concerned, or the data schema. So when you copy an event, it doesn't copy any of the volunteer stuff with it. It's more of an association. So for instance, if you were to copy a contact in CiviCRM, although that's not something I'm aware you can do, you wouldn't expect to copy all of their donations and other activity along with them, right? You're using them as a template for new behavior, and that is the same case with volunteer. I don't think that would be a very difficult addition, but it's something that hasn't been requested yet.
I think we have some new folks joining, so as folks are joining in, feel free to either chat your question to Frank, or you can go ahead and unmute your mic and go ahead and ask him your question.
Okay, we have a new one from Sandra. How to verify prerequisites such as certificates and training. At this point, that process is wholly manual. At this point, there isn't a way to, like an option to submit a PDF of certificate. Okay. Yeah, I can walk you through that to some extent, but there isn't any automated checking of prerequisites, and there isn't really a notion or concept of prerequisites in CiviVolunteer yet. That's something that we're going to begin to introduce in CiviVolunteer 1.4, but I wouldn't say it's going to be a full-blown implementation. So what you could do if you just need a certificate is so when we enable volunteering on an event, this new form is created for volunteers to sign up, and out of the box we put in a few fields that we think would be useful to most people managing events, but this is wholly customizable. So we could go ahead and create a custom field. And you know, I'm just going to assume that my screen is really small on your screen and blow it up a little bit here. Hopefully that's more readable to folks. CiviCRM doesn't usually respond too well when I blow it up this big. It gets kind of ugly, but I think it's a worthwhile trade-off for folks being able to follow along. Okay, so maybe let's just call this certificate, and we can make it a file. And let's go ahead and save that. And if we go ahead and go to profiles, so this form that you see on this page here, or the majority of it, is controlled by the reserved profile volunteer sign up. And so you can customize that by adding your own fields. And it looks like I spelled questions wrong. Right. So if we update the profile and then refresh the page, I can now request folks upload some file. Now again, the mechanism for determining whether someone is qualified or whether they uploaded a file at this point is still going to be something you have to do manually, but it's not a bad start. Okay, I'm looking at a few more chats here. A way to send email to event manager to follow up. I'm going to ask you to elaborate on that a little bit more, Sandra. So if I didn't already answer your question with the discussion of the PDF bit, let's come back to that one. In the meantime, I'm going to look at Rob's question here. I attempted to add custom fields to activities, but the profile wouldn't save the custom data. Too many entity types for the profile. It works when adding custom fields to contacts. So you're getting some sort of error message from CiviCRM. Yes, let's go ahead and test that out and see if we can reproduce your problem. Okay, let's see. It looks like I'm getting some notice from CiviCRM about something. That doesn't look like it's a CiviVolunteer related issue. And so here's my volunteer activity. It looks like the certificate didn't upload. Is that consistent with your experience, Rob? Okay. It's a Civi limitation, not a CiviVolunteer problem. You have to have special code handling more than 2 entity types in a profile. Okay. Right, because the profile already has contact information in it. Okay, I want to say that maybe this will be resolved in 1.4 because I haven't tested it, so don't hold me to that yet. But in 1.4, we're allowing folks to specify the profile that they want to use with any particular volunteer opportunity, and to kind of take that out of tech speak a little bit and explain what that means. In previous versions or the current version of CiviVolunteer, this form that you're looking at, you can make edits to it by manipulating the profile like we did, but this form is going to be used for all of your volunteer opportunities. And if you have different types of volunteer opportunities, you might want to ask different questions to the participants. So what we've done is we've allowed the specification of the profile or profiles that you want to use when you're designing the volunteer opportunity. So I think it will work to have one profile where you put your contact information and one profile where you put your activity information, and have those both processed appropriately. But I haven't tested for this particular use case. This is weird. I'm getting questions in the QA and the chat. Okay. So next question here is from Leo. What's coming in new API resources with the new addition. I think the question is about changes to the the CiviVolunteer API in the new version, and I think this partially working instance is partially working enough that we can look at the API Explorer. I think the main difference is we've added a new volunteer commendation activity. And so this is basically a feedback mechanism for your volunteers. If someone did a good job and you want to recognize them, you can kind of star their name on one of the interfaces to create a commendation record. And so there's an API for that with the usual get, create, etc. functions. But the existing APIs aren't changing in any significant way that I can think of. Please go ahead and unmute your mic and ask your question if you have one, or go ahead and type it into the chat or the Q&A section. Rob asks, has anyone requested posting soft credits to volunteers automatically? So you're trying to, are you trying to have a dollar value put on volunteer hours and recognize that as like a donation? We discount conference registration fees for volunteers. So we have had some folks kind of ask some questions, some similar questions. Not really with kind of any forward steps on that. Whoops, that's not where I wanted to go. So what I'm showing you now, and I guess I should increase the zoom here as well, is the roadmap, I guess, for CiviVolunteer. We have been awarded a conditional grant of $15,000 if we can get the CiviCRM community to match that. And so we have until the end of next month to get folks to pitch in for the features that they're most interested in having developed. And on this list, and these are not in any particular order, but on this list is this 8th item here, reward volunteers and offer incentives. I've talked to a few organizations that want to incentivize volunteers with rewards. And if you can't read that, I'll just go ahead and read it. In some organizations, volunteer hours can be used as a sort of currency. For example, in community media groups, sometimes there's a direct link between hours volunteered and access to resources. For example, 4 hours of volunteer time earns 1 hour of equipment rental. And so Rob's question is, I think, kind of in the same vein, where you want to trade X hours of volunteer time for Y dollars off of event registration. And I think the idea here is we want to track this credit separately from the volunteer hours. So if I volunteer 50 hours and I quote unquote trade half of that in for whatever, a free conference registration or whatever the case may be, we want to still recognize the 50 hours that I volunteered, but we want to recognize also that I don't have $50 of, or I'm sorry, 50 hours worth of volunteer credit that I can trade in, since I've already used half of that. And so I think we want to have, we want to track those separately, but there isn't a mechanism for that yet. I think this is a useful feature. I think conference registrations are just one example. I know some media organizations, like community media, public TV stations, are using CiviCRM and to some extent CiviVolunteer. And I think this is a logical next step for them, but we're hoping to make that happen in the current round of fundraising. Let's see, I have a few more questions in the chat here. Question received from Tony. We have recurring events that need 1 or 2 volunteers per instance, like door knocking every Wednesday evening. I think this is the same question. We need a way to specify how many volunteers are needed for such things, and then keep track of and show which days have enough people signed up and which need more, so our volunteers can see when they're most needed. How would we go about doing that? Okay, let me reread this here. Recurring events, 1 or 2 volunteers per instance, door knocking. Okay, so I think maybe the best way to do this is to think of the event in CiviVolunteer as just a container and not really anything more than that. So for instance, let's create a new event. Or whatever, I guess it doesn't matter. And we'll just call this March door knocking. And so we'll define, so I still have the default roles in here. You would obviously change these to something more appropriate. But let's just call them ticket takers. So I want 2 ticket takers on, let's say just weekdays, March 2nd, and let's say we do door knocking at 6 p.m. and just making things up. And it goes for 2 hours. And so the best way to do this now, I think, there isn't a recurring mechanism, although that looks like it's going to be introduced in CiviCRM 4.6, a framework for recurring entities. So we may have a way to hook in to make this sort of thing a little easier. But let's just do the first 3 days here to get an idea. Okay, and so when we are doing back office management, so if I'm just the volunteer coordinator and there are a few people who I know are available, I can just go ahead and I can just go ahead and put them where they're needed. And if I am one of your volunteers, I can see the shifts this way. And so I don't get a sense of which ones are filled as a volunteer or as an outsider to your organization, but I do get a sense of which needs still need to be filled. So I think that answers your question, Tony. If you have a follow-up question, please go ahead and send that in. Sandra comments, I think if role is filled, it no longer shows as an option. That is correct. Just to show that here. So I've got the volunteer role ticket taker, and I've got 2 times, March 3rd and March 4th. And if I go back here, whoops, you can see March 3rd and March 4th still have opening, but March 2nd is filled up. So if I reassign Dr. Adams here and refresh the public form, you'll see that all 3 shifts are now open again. Right, so let me read Tony's comment here. I partially answered his question. His organization is using the event calendar extension to show events, many of which are volunteer related, in a month layout. It would be really slick if there was a CSS class applied to those such that we could color code by whether more volunteers are still needed. That doesn't seem too hard, Tony, but for that I think we would want to take a look at how the event calendar extension is written. I haven't used that extension myself, but based on its name and my total lack of familiarity with it as kind of the volunteer guy, I would say that it has no concept of CiviVolunteer, and so it's only looking for events. But it would be trivial to do an API call to see whether that's filled or not. And I guess, I don't know if walking through an API call is too geeky here, but you can take a look at the volunteer project API here and retrieve it by entity table equals CiviCRM event, and entity ID is equal to whatever the ID of your event is, and you should get some results back that give you some information about the project. Actually, maybe it's the need one that has the information about. Yeah, I'll have to take a look at this. It may not be in the released version yet, but one of these API calls, I think it's one of these returns information about how full the shift is. And so if you had a value that was, if you had a value greater than 0 of remaining seats, then you could apply a CSS class in that other extension. Okay. I, Okay, so it looks like I got a second here from Leo to look more at the APIs for the needs. Yeah, and like I said, I think that that information has been exposed to some extent in the API. I just can't remember whether it's in the version that's out yet or the one that we're releasing. Question from Carmen, how can we track volunteer hours? Okay. So when you define a volunteer opportunity, the length is recorded here, and folks can be assigned using this interface, or they can sign up themselves using the public sign-up form. And then at the end of the day, after the event is over, you would match up their commitments with reality, I guess. So anyone who's managed volunteers before knows that what folks say they can do and what they are actually able to do can vary pretty widely sometimes. And so this gives us the ability to say, you know, Justina actually met her obligation or her commitment, or you know, she left a little early, or she was a superstar and stayed twice as long, and then you could mark that as completed and save it. And there is a CiviVolunteer report under Contact Reports. And let's see here, let's turn off this activity date so we just get everything. So we can just run the report here. And so you might want to filter your report a little more than I did, because here we're showing volunteer activities that haven't been completed yet. They're still in a scheduled state. But if we filter just for the completed ones, we can see the total time completed in minutes and the total time scheduled in minutes. And you get some nice totals at the bottom here as well. So time scheduled is 120 plus 120, and time completed is 240. So even though not all of our volunteers followed up, in this example, we're meeting the commitment here. And so this is how you would get a sense of how much your organization is utilizing volunteers. And you can do a lot of filtering with this as well. So if you're using the feature if you're using the beneficiary feature where maybe you have different chapters that are using volunteers, or whatever the case may be, you can even filter by, you know, did they do their volunteer work in support of the Boys and Girls Club, or you know, some other group, or different chapters of the same organization. You can filter, you know, by time, or really any constituent criteria. Leo asks, on the log hours, why not make the scheduled time, why not make the scheduled the default value for actual? That reduces labor. I think maybe because we didn't want to reduce labor in not that we don't want to reduce labor, but we didn't want to reduce it at the expense of accuracy. There are some shortcuts in here though, so let's just get a few more people in here so our report is a little more interesting. So for instance, we can do this. And so what this button does, it says click here to copy the actual duration value in one row to all rows. So if you put 75 in the top row and you have 20 rows on this page and you hit this, it will pile them all the way down. I'm not sure that it's a bad idea to pre-populate with the scheduled duration. I think maybe we were being overly cautious in the first version. Yeah, I think I'd be open to feedback from a wider group of people to see what makes the most sense for them. But there are some shortcuts in here, and same thing happens with the status. You can change the top one and push the changes all the way down the column. Sandra asks, do complete volunteer go into that contact activities? I'm not sure what you're asking. Please update your question and we'll get back to it. Tony makes a good suggestion. Maybe just have another button that copies from scheduled duration to actual duration, blank by default, but easy to fill. That's a great idea and pretty easy to implement. Let's see, is this? So Leo's got a question about why the volunteer assignment API has no parameters in the API Explorer. Is that by design? Never mind. Okay. I would say for the API, I think I'm just gonna let's stop using this Q&A thing since most people are using the chat. So I'm gonna ignore that for the rest of the conversation here. But yeah, the API Explorer is really helpful. I'm not sure we've done everything that's required to expose all of the parameters to it. It may be that they're exposed. It may be that some things aren't showing there, but the source is always the best reference for that. If you're integrating with the APIs, you're probably already pretty familiar with code, so I would dive in there, and we'll take a look at seeing if we can make those APIs work better. How does volunteer time show in a contact record? Okay. So for any of these folks, you can click on their contact record. So we had Justina Bachman do some volunteering here. And if you look in the Activities tab, all of the volunteer activities show up here. and you could filter that if you wanted to show you only the volunteer stuff. There isn't a nice dashboard with a summary of hours or anything like that. So if you were interested in looking at a particular volunteer activity, you could just drill down, and then that information is right here on the volunteer record. If you needed to get volunteer hours for a specific person, you could just filter for them in your report. And so this is a report that just shows me Justina Bachman's hours, and it gives me her total for all time. I think it would be great to have a tab on the contact record to provide a nice summary, maybe even a breakdown of you know, what types of roles she tends to prefer to fill, whether it's usher or ticket taker or whatever custom roles you have in your CRMs. But that's one of those things that we're hoping will get funded in the fundraising campaign that we have. And I do really want to emphasize that there's $15,000 of development for CiviVolunteer sitting on the table, and we really don't want to leave it there. So we want to do everything we can for both to make sure that we don't leave that money on the table, but to scratch whatever itch your organization has with how it uses volunteers, and if that contact dashboard tab to summarize volunteer participation would really make your life easier. I don't know how much it would cost to build that. Let's just make up a number. Let's say it's $5,000. If that's worth $1,000 to your organization, and there's another organization who agrees with you, with those funds and the match that we get from the grant, that's basically enough to cover it. So we have a really unique opportunity here where we can add on our pet features or take care of those nagging little problems without any individual organization having to really bear the cost of that. How can we individually donate? Well, I thank you for the question, first of all. I don't like to think of it as a donation. I like to think of it as collective purchasing. We're able to do more together, and hopefully everyone who contributes to the fundraising campaign is getting something of value back. So it's not really a donation. And I know a lot of nonprofit organizations can't make donations themselves, but they can hire contractors. So we're happy to frame it in that way for anyone who note about organizations. Yeah, I think this is a point I was making. My organizations are legally limited to only donating to registered 501c3s. Right, so we're not asking for donations. What we're asking for is for you folks to contact us, and I think Roshini has been in touch with many of you already about which features are really going to make it easier for you to manage your volunteers, and how much you think you can pay towards implementing that feature. And we're going to do the rest of the work in terms of matching up organizations that have similar interests and kind of pooling their money so that not just one organization is fronting the costs. And in addition to that, we can double your dollar with the grant money that we have. So I know it's a hard sell for some people to support organizations like CiviCRM because it's viewed as a donation, but it's really not a donation. It's an investment. It's collective purchasing. You're able to hire a developer for much less than you would be able to, and much more value by doing it this way. So sorry for the rant there. But yeah, it looks like Roshni has posted some links in the chat here. If you just go to our website, ginkgostreet.com, there's a link at the top of the page for information about that. It's also listed on civiforum.org under the Make It Happens. Leo asks, is beta available for your new edition? Git is still showing production edition. All of the code is on GitHub, Leo. So the version that is downloadable through the CiviCRM Manage Extensions interface is this one, tag 4.5-1.3.3, and that's coming off of the 4.5-1.3 branch. But if you download master, there's all the new stuff in there that is getting pretty close to finished. Okay, I think that's just about all the time we have. If anyone didn't get to ask their question, this is your last chance. And thanks all of you for spending your valuable time with us. And I hope you learned something. And that if the thing that you wanted isn't in CiviVolunteer yet, you can find a way to scrape together a few $100s or hopefully more to ensure that we don't miss this opportunity.